So what's hanging over your head? Be interesting, maybe it wouldn't, if we could look around the room and see what all was hanging above our heads. This sermon series is called Under Pressure, and as much as there were some very pertinent things that we tend to deal with in everyday life that came through in that video, I think often when we reach adulthood, we tend to tie into those very strongly, but I'll tell you, this sermon series didn't grow out of that. It actually grew out of a time I spent with our youth group when I sat down and visited with them and said, what topics would you like to hear me preach about? And the topic of worry and anxiety and pressure was one that we decided to do, and I had a very interesting visit with them. So today's topic is going to be about do not worry, and it's broad as a start off to the sermon series. But next week and the week after that, I'm going to deal with burdens next week, especially looking at some of the things that our youth have to deal with, because I know it doesn't only affect them, it affects parents, and how do you find that balance within the family with all of the stuff that we have to do. And then the week after that, we'll speak about the pressure of who you are to other people. Sometimes the example that we have to set for others. So today's a general chat about worrying. Next week, we'll talk about the burdens that we carry with all the pressure that we find in the activities we have to do. And then the week after that, I want to talk about the pressure of being the person that you have to be in your circle of friends or in your family or whatever the case is. And I really want to, especially next week and the week after, speak to our youth. So invite your family and your friends, because this is, certainly for me, it was an eye-opening discussion. So let me tell you what happened to me just recently. How many of you have flown in the last year? Keep your hands up if it was a pleasant experience. All right, well, that dropped a whole lot right there. Let me tell you about my pleasant experience just recently. Usually flying is filled with difficulties. I had a special occasion. Some of you may not know, but I love all kinds of machinery on wheels and tracks, and had an opportunity to go to a convention called Mine Expo in Vegas a few weeks ago, and they have all these huge big pieces of mining equipment on display, trucks that are literally the size of a double-story house. And I was at this convention, and on my last day, I had gone to McDonald's through the drive-thru to get a soda before I went into the convention. So I parked my car and took my soda and went into the convention. And my flight was leaving at 6:30, so at 4 o'clock I left the convention and walked back to my car, and kind of the last few paces just before I got to the car, I realized I didn't have my wallet. So it is now just after 4 o'clock, and my plane takes off at 6:30, and in my wallet is all my identity and everything. So now I'm thinking, okay, I've got this neat little balance between the time that I have to get to the airport, drop the rental car off, and get to the plane, and trying to retrace my steps. I knew I hadn't lost it because I'd used it in the drive-thru at McDonald's. So I knew I hadn't gone anywhere that I would have lost it. I thought, well, maybe it fell out of my pocket somewhere. I always keep my wallet in my front pocket. And I traced my steps back, and there was one particular point at which I'd sat down on a trunk, and I thought, well, maybe it fell out of my pocket then, and it wasn't there. I went to the security window and reported that, I'd lost my wallet, and decided then, okay, time is getting few. Let me get to the airport. And I thought, how am I going to get on the plane? I have no identity. So I called Southwest Airlines, and they said, well, have someone fax your birth certificate across to you. So I got to the rental car place and said, I need someone to fax something across to me. Sure, they said, well, it took them 15 minutes to figure out how to set up the brand new fax they had just gotten to get my documents faxed across to me. Time is ticking. So finally they faxed my birth certificate across to me, So I have a backpack, I've checked in a piece of luggage, and I go to the TSA agent and spill out my tale of woe, and he looks at my birth certificate and says, "What's this?" Well, you see, here's the problem. I was born in England. It doesn't look like an American birth certificate. It was written out longhand. And in the birth certificates in those days, my last name does not appear under my name. Where my name is just as my first and second name. You got to look under my dad's name to find my last name. Well, that confused that agent, so he passed me off to another agent. Time is ticking. That agent doesn't understand the form and passes me off to their superior. So I'm now sitting with a third TSA agent. I gently explain to him, okay, this is how you read the birth certificate form. And he says, well, this is not good enough. Time is ticking. Fortunately, being a lover of, cars and all of that kind of stuff, I had taken a magazine from home to read on the airplane, and it had my subscription information on the magazine. So he looked at that, and I fortunately still had the envelope that I had my tickets in for Mine Expo, and I had my name and address and all that, and showed that to him. And after lots of deliberation, he said, okay, you can go. At which point, will passenger Wayne Calder please report to your flight? The gate where I was taking off was on the exact opposite end of the airport to the security. So I ran all the way through that airport to my plane. I got on the plane. I'm the last one on there. I was just more thankful that the woman sitting next to me had more perfume drenching off her than I had sweat dripping off me. That was the only saving grace. But let me tell you this. The bottom line of the story is that Matthew passage didn't work really well in that situation. It was really hard having to face getting on a plane without any identity and sit and think, don't worry. That song didn't help either. But there was a point on the plane. By the way, the TSA agent said to me, buddy, you didn't lose your wallet. You were in Las Vegas. You got pickpocketed. I thought, out of my front pocket? You got to be kidding me. Well, true as nuts, I get home, we called the credit card company, and somebody had started using the credit card already. I was pickpocketed. But somewhere on that plane, I remember just thinking, you know what? I've just got to pray and let this go. And as frustrating as it is to go back to the DMV to get your driver's license, and as frustrating as it is to have to cancel your credit card and go to your bank and say to them, okay, there's this debit card out there somewhere, and as frustrating as it was to lose the cash that was in the wallet, at some point I just had to say, I've got to let this go. So Jesus' words are profound words, but they're difficult ones to apply. They are very difficult to apply, especially when you're right in the stressful situation, in the difficult moment. It is really difficult to sit and think, well, God does take care of the birds of the air and the lilies of the fields. But what exactly did Jesus mean? I mean, if the Bible is practical and Jesus is for real, then shouldn't those words apply to my everyday life? Well, they should, and they do. But sometimes we need to think a bit about that. And sometimes in dealing with the issue of worry, perhaps what we need to do with this Bible passage from the book of Matthew is let's look at what it's not saying. What is it not saying? Well, the first thing that it's not saying is that if you, for instance, have financial difficulties and the Bible says God takes care of the birds in the air, He loves you even more, He'll take care of more of you. If you're in the midst of financial difficulties, God's not just going to send a grocery supply company over to your house to stock your cupboard. That's not the way it works. That's not what the passage is saying. The passage is not saying just sit down and wait and all things will be delivered to you. God takes care of the birds of the air, but they have to get out of the nest and fly and go and hunt. They have their part of the bargain that they have to do. They have to keep up with their end of the agreement. So when it comes to dealing with situations in life, God puts responsibility on us. There are certain things that God does expect of us, even when we face difficult situations. So don't worry. Doesn't mean just sit back, everything else will take care of itself. No. Part of don't worry means you need to be active. You need to be doing something. There's two kinds of worry. There's a worry that leads to paralysis, and there's a worry that gets you going. Edward Hallowell is a psychiatrist, and he said, good worry is worry that leads to constructive action. Toxic worry does the opposite. It paralyzes you. So there is good worry. When the money is running low, you should be worried, but in the good sense of the word. It should spur you into action. There's certain things in life, things that you're faced with, that should spur you into action. If I just sat down in Las Vegas and said, God will take care of this, I don't have to worry about it, and waited for somebody to come and escort me onto the plane to fly me back home, that's not how God works. I had to fulfill my part of the deal. I had to be proactive in taking care of my difficult situation so that God could take care of his. That was part of the deal. And part of the piece I remember sitting on the plane thinking this through was, I just have to take this one step at a time and deal with this one issue at the time. I can make this flight a 2.5-hour flight of misery, or I can just say, when we get home, we'll deal with the next situation. I have to do my part, you have to do yours. The birds of the air have to take care of themselves when it comes to their own diet. So the passage is not saying, don't do anything. Helmut Tilke, who is a theologian, also said, Jesus did not say, look at the ostrich out in the field as it buries its head in the sand. The passage is also not saying, just pretend things are okay. Faith is not wishful thinking. God taking care of us is not just fantasy living. I can't just pretend that I don't have problems. We all have difficulties in life that we have to face. We have to face them. Birds have dangers that they have to face. It's part of their life. We have 2 cats. They represent the danger to the birds in our neighborhood, okay? God takes care of the cats as well as the birds. I can't pretend there aren't difficulties in life. There are difficulties in life, and as a Christian, you will face them. But you've got to do your part. You've got to do your part. And you can't just bury it and pretend that it's not there, that it doesn't exist. So then, if that's what the Bible is not saying, then what is it saying? What is it over and above the fact that I do need to take some responsibility for my own issues and my own problems? What else do I do? Well, let's go to that Matthew 6:33 verse and have a look there at what Jesus is suggesting. He says, in the context of don't worry, he says, but seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness, and these things will be given to you. And these things, he means the basic necessities of life. So I think part of taking care of my own worry is doing what I am responsible for. But part of taking care of my worry is that at some point I need to sit down and look at things in perspective. I need to put the situation into its own perspective. Is God first in all parts of my life, including the parts of my life I worry about? Even when things are down, can I approach God with an appreciative heart? Again, Christianity doesn't mean that I have to fake life. It doesn't mean that it's always happy-go-lucky. That's not what this passage is saying. But at the basis of my life, can I approach God from the perspective of saying, God, thank you for what I have, and thank you that you are in my life. Let that be the starting point. And then start looking at the priorities and start looking at, is the thing that I'm worrying about that important? If I had to rank it on a list, if I sat down with my friend and said, okay, let me look at the struggles I have in my life and let me list where this appears in what's going on in my life, is it really that important? So there's a perspective issue here in looking at that Matthew 6:33 passage. And then tied into that comes Paul's letter to the Philippians. So let's go to Philippians 4, verse 6. Do not be anxious about anything. But again, he says, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. So, what do you pray for when you are worried? Well, I think all of us want to pray that our situation goes away. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to ask of God, but that doesn't always happen. So then what do I pray for next? Well, I think the smart thing to pray for is to pray for the right friends to share your worries with. I do think we need to share our worries with others. I think we need to pray for wisdom. God, would you give me the wisdom as I look at this in the areas of my life to know not just what to do, but to know how much energy I need to expend on this. We have a congregation member who works for DirecTV as customer service rep. He was telling me the other day that he had a woman call him up, and what had happened was she had ordered 4 receivers for her house, and the tech showed up and only had 3. So he couldn't do the install that day. He was going to come back the next day and do the whole thing in one go. He said she called him up in tears. In tears. I have no TV. What am I going to do? So he said to her, well, I'll tell you what. How about I give $50, credit your account for $50, and you go out and watch the movies tonight. Oh, but I don't know what movie I'm going to see. What movie can I go see? He said, it's one day. It's just one day. Can you just wait the one day? Go see a movie tonight. Just take a load off your mind. Seriously, in the list of our worries that we have in our day, is that worth crying over? Frustration, yes. But there's that perspective thing again. And I think that's what Paul and Jesus are trying to say to us, is when we have to deal with our worries in life, it is well worthwhile just sitting down and looking at it and taking it into perspective. I would say losing your wallet 2.5 hours before you take off probably has a slightly higher load factor on the worry and anxiety scale than not having the right amount of receivers installed in your house when you're talking about a 24-hour period. So we need to look at things in perspective. And I think approaching them with a heart of thanksgiving, I think approaching our worries with a sense of appreciation. So many times people will say to me, you know what, I'm so worried about stuff in life, but I look at some other people and look at what they have to deal with. I mean, I watch the news and you watch the people in Syria. I mean, good grief. Losing my wallet is nothing when they're fighting for their freedom and trying to escape to the country next door with what little they have. So sometimes we need to take our worries and put them in perspective. And the perspective needs to be that God is first. No matter what, God is in control. No matter what, God cares. And then I deal with it from that point of view from then on. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. Speak these things through. Help them to help you gain a perspective on what it is that you have to face. So I don't think Jesus' words are glib or lighthearted or preached from an ivory tower when he says, don't worry. I think what he's saying is, when you approach life, look at how you approach difficulties in life. You know, some of us are natural-born warriors, not in the good militant sense of the word, in the sense of fret and worry. Other people are just born with the gift of faith. They just don't worry. My mom's like that. My dad's not. I think I attend more to my dad than to my mom. So, let's be honest. It's not always situations that determine whether or not we are worrywarts. It's more often who we are as a person. Because you can have the same situation and have 2 different people involved facing the same thing, and they deal with it very, very differently. So, it's hard to have to face to the fact, if you're a worrywart, that you're a worrywart. But the good thing about that is that the situation doesn't have to change. It's you who can change, and God can help you with that if you'll allow Him to. If you'll allow Him to speak into that part of your life and address that part of your life. So when Jesus is saying, don't worry, it's not just a glib brush over statement. He takes it seriously. I'm pretty sure that Jesus was very anxious the hours before he was crucified. I'm pretty sure that when he tried to approach his friends to talk about it and they fell asleep at the foot of the tree, it increased his anxiety. But through his prayer and through prioritizing, he was able to go through it. So that's not a light-hearted statement from Jesus, and it's not an ivory tower preaching. But seek not to worry. Seek to be at peace. How about we pray? I want you to take your hands, close your eyes, take your hands and place both hands palm up in your lap. Don't hold them one in the other. Hold them apart. Think of the two things that are worrying you most right now. And visualize the one situation in one hand and the other in the other hand. The two things that are of greatest concern to you right now. And will you slide your hands just a little bit forward in your lap and open your fingers and say in your heart quietly after me, God, would you take these two things that I am most worried about? And God, as you hold them, will you help me to look at you and know what to do? God, will you give me a sense of peace in my heart? And even though there's a difficult decision I may face, a difficult situation I find myself in, my hands are open, and I ask God that you'd give me the strength to keep on giving the situation to you. God, I trust you for your guidance. I trust you for my friends and my family that they'll help me through this. God, I appreciate your care for me and of me. In Christ's name, amen. Can you guys in the back go back to the slide that said, my hands are full of hope? I thought that was a great analogy. When we hand our troubles to God, we aren't empty-handed. There was a slide there that said, hope in my hands. There we are. To dance upon this barren land, hope in my hands. It's a great, great message to leave with. So why don't we say that last song together, that last verse together. I'm going to fall off the stage right now. Let's say together, to dance upon this barren land, hope in my hands. Friends, you don't go without hope.